G'day and welcome to another Space Engineers tutorial. Today we're going to be taking a first look at the AI controller blocks. So this is going to be the first of potentially 2 or more tutorials where I'm going to be going through the various functions we can achieve with this and what some of the pitfalls are with attempting to achieve those functions. So today's goal is to get a drone to approach, land and lock down to a connector and also launch automatically. Because most types of drones you're going to be building, you're going to want them to be able to come back and land. Missiles being a rather obvious exception to that rule. But since most of the drones you build are going to need to come back to base, that's where I want to start. There are 5 different AI controller blocks. We've got the flight moving block, we've got the defensive combat, we've got the offensive combat, the basic task block, and the recorder block. Now, for the beginning stages of getting a drone to automatically come down and lock to one of these connectors, we're going to need 2 of these blocks. We're going to need the recorder block and the move block. The move block in this instance replaces, for those familiar with the old autopilot system, it replaces the remote control. We no longer need a remote control on the drones, it's all handled by these AI controllers. To start setting up our drone, we're going to need a flight move controller. These have a specific orientation. You can see F for front, L for left, rear panel, R for right. We have the icon on the top, and on the bottom we have nothing. Well, an arrow kind of shape that points where forward is. If you notice, all of these sides have something that kind of points forward so that you know where the front is, and the front is the side that doesn't have an arrow or a big thing saying rear panel on it. They really made this quite easy. What I've got here is a very simple atmospheric ship. It has thrust in all directions, which is important to get the most out of these AI flight controllers. They don't tolerate lacking thrust directions all that well. They can still cope, but they definitely work better if you give them thrust in every direction, even in a gravitational field. So that's why I have these thrusters pointing downward. Obviously you're also going to want a gyroscope and a power source for the thrusters, but all this other stuff I've got, like the cockpit up here, the guns, that's all superfluous. You really just need something with thrusters in all 6 directions, fuel/power for those thrusters, and a gyroscope. So let's start by placing our movement controller. We're going to make sure we place it so it's facing forward. The arrows are not pointing forward. Now they are. We'll make sure the top is up, which is our little icon. Place that in there. The next block we're going to use here is going to be the AI recorder. This block is how we're going to set up the path that our little drone is going to take to get to our connector. And this is a very specific, accurate path, and much like the movement controller, it has a specific orientation. It's got all the same faces as the movement controller, except for the top, which is our arrow to show it's a recorder. Let's place this one in here, the correct way round, like so. And now we have enough pieces to be able to set up a method for connecting to our connector here. So first off, let's hop on and fly away. We can start setting up our path. For our drone to be able to safely land, we're going to need to teach it what the safe path is to approach and land on our connector. And this needs to be a safe path because once you get close to that connector, you can't really have it detecting collisions, because then it can't get close enough to the connector in order to lock on. So we need to really make sure that this has a nice, safe path. The way we're going to do that is by going to our AI recorder. There are 2 methods available to us at the moment. The first is using the recorder to record periodically as you move your drone toward that connector. This method basically creates a new waypoint every 1.7 seconds, assuming you have moved at least 1 meter since the previous waypoint. That can work, but honestly, I think it's much better if we manually create our waypoints and set them up ourselves. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to go to our G menu, we're going to select our AI recorder block, and then we're going to select add waypoint. Now every time I hit that hotbar number 3, it's going to generate a waypoint for our AI recorder block. So that we can see these appear on our HUD and be able to actually see the path as we generate it, what we're also going to do is go to our AI recorder block, make sure show on HUD is checked, Scroll down here, make sure Show Path on HUD is checked. Both of these are off by default. Then go to Info and select Show AI Functions. Now, as we create this path, we should start seeing little things appear on our HUD. Like we've got our 0 there, then we go forward, try and line ourselves roughly up over the connector, then create another one, and there's our path between those two spots. We'll lower down, come in closer, trying to, as we get closer to this connector, line ourselves up just a little bit away, maybe 5 to 10 meters away, generate a waypoint there, and then come straight down. Ideally we want these lined up fairly close over the top. Doesn't need to be perfect, but close is good. The reason for that is that way it helps the AI line itself up properly to this connector. With an overhead connector like this, it's not as much of an issue, but with a front or rear or side mounted connector, it's going to be a bit more tricky, and you're going to really want to make sure that it's got a nice straight path to just move directly onto that connector. So we'll create a third waypoint here, and that's kind of it done. In order to get this to follow that path, what we need to next do is go to our AI flight move block. In this situation, the move block is going to do whatever the recorder tells it to once we tell the recorder to start. So we're going to turn AI behavior on for the move block so that it can take control of this vehicle even though I'm in the cockpit. We're going to turn collision avoidance off, and because we want to very accurately get onto this connector, we're going to put precision mode on. I'm going to leave the speed limit as is, and I'm going to reduce the minimum altitude down to 0 because we need to get really close to the ground to land on this connector. Retain alignment to planetary gravity, and these max pitch angle and roll angle, they dictate how far, helps if I turn off the AI behavior of the move block so that I can actually demonstrate this. Those controls dictate how far you can lean forward, how far you can lean back, and how far you can roll side to side. So if you've got a grid that can't retain its altitude when it rolls too far to the side, forward or back, then you're going to want to restrict those angles. Now I deliberately built this so that this thing can even fly upside down and keep itself flying. I did that in this instance just to make sure this was as safe as it possibly could be. It's obviously not going to be a practical thing to have thrust in all directions that can retain the altitude of the ship when you've got something trying to transport heavy loads between places. Let's turn our flight move controller back on, and I'm happy with these angles because, as we demonstrated, this craft is capable of flying at all angles. Now the AI recorder block, we need it to start telling the move controller what to do. So we'll turn on its AI behavior, and then we're going to click play, and the ship is going to head to waypoint 0. Well, it would if it could get away from the connector. But the connector's magnet was a little too strong. So we can see now it is heading to waypoint 0. It's going to turn around and then head to waypoint 1. One thing to note is that when it's heading to the waypoints, it is putting the recorder block specifically on that waypoint. So if your recorder block is a long way from the center of mass of your ship, that may have an impact in how the ship ends up behaving while it's passing through these waypoints. And now it should start just lowering itself down quite safely toward that connector. And down we go. Magnet brings it in, and we're ready to lock. The drone doesn't need us to lock this. It can actually do that for itself. So what we can do is we can set up our recorder task to have actions that happen at each of these waypoints. So waypoint 3 is when it gets in range of the connector. So what we can do is select waypoint 3, click set up action, grab our connector, and select lock. Now when the drone reaches waypoint 3, it's going to attempt to lock that connector. That's not the only action we can have. You might have noticed before that I left collision avoidance off on the AI flight move controller. We can actually turn that on, select our recorder task, and at waypoint 2, where it's nearing the connector, turn that off. So we go to setup action, we grab our AI move block, and we select collision avoidance off. Now when it reaches waypoint 2, collision avoidance will turn off, which should allow it to approach that connector. So let's try that again. In order for the AI recorder to start behaving, you can simply click play and it will automatically turn on the AI behavior. There we we go. It's now going to head back to our waypoint 0 and go through the cycle again. If we keep an eye on our control panel, we'll see that the flight movement controller still has collision avoidance on, and when we reach waypoint 2, it should turn off. Now moving to waypoint 2 with much spinning, which is not ideal for those with motion sickness. There we go. And collision avoidance turns off. It moves in. And oh, here's one of the pitfalls I wanted to highlight for you guys. You might notice that this hasn't actually gotten within the lock range of the connector. One of the reasons for that is that my waypoint is possibly just a touch too high. In order to get a more reliable connection, there are two things I like to do. First up, we're going to remove that waypoint. Delete selected. We're going to turn off our AI move controller, and we're going to turn off our connector. The reason I turn off our connector is because when the connector is on and the magnet is active, it kind of gives us a little bit of a hover above the connector. You can see through there's a gap, which means our waypoint is not as close to the connector as it could be. The closer we can get to that connector, the greater the chance that the drone is going to effectively get within range and be able to lock. So by turning off the connector, we can ignore that magnetism and go down as low as possible, get right into that colliding position, which seems a bit unsafe, but I found this is the most reliable way that I've managed to get this to work. And then press our add waypoint. And now this is our new waypoint, which is just a little bit lower. This is going to increase the chance of this connector getting within range when we reach waypoint 3. The other thing that I have found to be quite helpful is to add a timer block. So let's add a timer block to our little ship here. And instead of triggering the connector to lock when we get in range, what we're going to do is we're going to select waypoint 3, set up action, and we're going to grab our timer block and select start. Then our timer block probably only needs a delay of 2 seconds, even 1.5 seconds. Set up action, and it's going to lock the connector. The reason for the delay is that it helps give a little bit of time for that connector to wobble into place, like you just saw that the other drone did just behind there. It wobbles into place, it then has time to get that magnetism happening before the lock action is triggered. If it triggers the moment you hit the third waypoint, sometimes your connector won't be in position just yet. And I've found that this is much, much, much more reliable. So let's try it again. See if I'm right. See if this tries to prove me wrong. So let's turn on our AI flight move controller. Let's turn on our recorder task. And go again. Here we go. Approaching the connection setup. We get the magnet. It stabilizes and then it locks. So if you're having trouble with getting the locking working, remember, you need to give yourself some time for that lock to get in place by using the timer block and setting a delay. Even as short as 1.5 seconds is enough. And also make sure you turn off your connector so that you can get that waypoint really low down and really push those connectors against each other for that waypoint to be in the sweet spot where that magnetism of the connectors is going to be effective. Some of you may have noticed that the AI flight move block has a maximum speed limit. Let's see what happens if we set this to 100 meters a second and start this whole process all over again. So this is our 100 meters a second. Let's see how fast our ship goes. But, oh, we might have gotten up to 15 meters a second there. And now not so much. What about turning around? Are we going to approach the base quickly? Oh, 12? No. So, one of the things that might irritate you when you're first setting this up, and certainly was something that took me quite some time to get my head around, is that these flight recorder blocks are not particularly useful for long-range travel, at least in their current iteration. In order to get something that's going to work well for long-distance travel, we need a different system. And that different system involves a different block. So what we're going to do is we're going to add another controller block to our little flyer here. The controller block we're going to add is this AI basic task block. It does not have a specific orientation you need to place it. You can place it any way you like. So let's pop it down over here on the side. And now what we're going to do is we're going to use both of these systems to set up a way for this to return to base from far, far away. And what we're going to need in order for this task block to work is a GPS marker close to where our recorder block's waypoints began. So that somewhere like here should probably be adequate. So we'll open up our chat box with enter /GPS home base return. There we go, we've got a GPS marker there. Now let's fly away. Probably not too far. We don't want to wait too long for this to see if it works. Within the basic task AI block, we have a few things we can look at. We've got a set objective. In this case, what we want to use is the autopilot. We don't want follow home, we don't want follow player, because follow home and follow player are following a grid or following a player. In this case, we just want a simple autopilot. The mode we want is one way, because we want this to reach its objective and then switch off. When it switches off, we're going to use it to switch on the recorder to do the last final bit of motion. The reason we don't use the basic task block for going all the way right to the connector is that it doesn't move as accurately, which is also why it moves faster. So we're going to add our home base return waypoint to our list up here. We now have that, and that's the only waypoint we need. And now, just like we did with the recorder block, we're going to select our waypoint, we're going to set up an action, and in this case, we're going to grab our recorder block and hit play. So when one device reaches the end, it'll activate the next one in the sequence, and that way we can send this back to land from anywhere. Well, nearly anywhere. It needs to have enough power to get home. So let's give it a go. Turn on our movement controller block so that the basic and recorder task blocks can actually make the thing move, and then start our basic task block. And now, with our speed limit set to 100, we're getting up to 50 meters, or almost 50 meters a second. It's substantially faster. It's about as fast as I'd honestly want a drone to go anyway, but this at least is moving at a reasonable pace. And now we're approaching our waypoint, home base return, it'll switch off, and it'll start that recorder block, which is now moving to its more specific waypoints. And I wonder which of these two is going to land first. The other one. The other one's totally going to win. The system that I've shown you today is something that you can use for patrol drones once they need to return to base in order to get fuel. You could use an event controller to set them to return to base once their battery gets down to a certain level, or when their ammunition level gets down to a certain level, they can return. You could even do it based on damage, things like that. Or you can use this to create a courier drone like I've done with the one that's running back and forth between these two bases. Or you can use it basically for any drone that needs to land on a connector or needs to land in a specific place. That's why I wanted to focus on this part first. This part to me is both the trickiest but also the most important for getting a drone that feels like it's useful. Our drone can now land on the base on its own from basically anywhere. So let's organize some ways to send it out and about on its own as well. If we wanted to take a very simple patrol route, what we could do is just fly over here, create a new GPS. So this could be /GPS patrol 1. And with that GPS created, I can head back over to my drone here, grab our AI basic task block and add that GPS to my list. Now obviously I don't want it as the second one, so we need to move it up the list, and now we have patrol 1, then home base return. Now to trigger this to be able to take off, we're going to need a couple of actions to happen. First off, we're going to need this to disconnect from the connector and then make sure that it's enabled the flight move block and the basic task block so that it heads to that GPS. simplest way to do all of that is to set up a timer to do each of those actions, and then we can have even a button just to activate that timer. There's another timer block on this little drone already, so let's grab it and set up our actions. What we need to do is unlock our connector, which is connector drone. So that is unlock. And then we want to grab our basic task block and select AI behavior on, just to ensure that this is active if it's not at the time, just for a little bit of extra reliability in case something's been interrupted at a different stage. Let's set AI behavior on for the move block as well. And just for a little bit of extra safety, let's turn collision avoidance on for our move block. Because, as you recall from earlier, in our recorder block, we turn collision avoidance off when this comes back. So this way we'll have collision avoidance on when it takes off and starts flying, but we'll have it off when it comes back to land. So now, if I want this to be able to take off, I can just simply create a button to press that could either be on the drone or it can be on the base here. Let's put one down on the base, shall we? Big red button, grab the button, grab our timer block, and click trigger now, so that it triggers immediately on pressing that red button. 3, 2, 1, and off the drone goes. Trying to avoid colliding with things, being careful, which is good timing because it's about to run into that other drone. I was really worried that the collision avoidance wasn't going to work there because this other drone was going to run into it. But now the drone should start flying towards that patrol point 1. It'll then head to its return to base GPS point. It'll then switch its return to base path recorder on, come into land, lock down to the connector, and wait for me to send it off again. When you're starting to set up for more advanced behaviors where you may be landing at 2 different facilities, you're going to need to add more of these recorder and flight blocks. The reason for that, particularly with the recorder block, is that it doesn't keep track of where it's up to in its waypoint list when you stop the behavior. If I turn the behavior off, or if I press stop, it will always go back to waypoint 0, no matter how far through this list I am. So we saw I was heading towards, I believe, waypoint 2 at that stage, and it's now back at waypoint 0. So what this means is that if you need to have the AI recorder act at 2 separate phases of a particular drone's overall behavior, trying to think of the umbrella terms here and struggling. If you need to have it acting at 2 separate points, you're going to need 2 separate blocks because you can't stop it and have it start midway through for the other part of the behavior. The things I've shown you today are the basic tool blocks you need in order to set up a system like that returning drone that I've got set up going to the other base. Once you've got these basics down, you can add so many other pieces to this to be able to come up with some really complicated behaviors and some really cool behaviors using the drones. In future tutorials, I'm going to cover more of those complex behaviors, including things like missiles, which I think I'll have a dedicated video for, because I really want to find out exactly what the best way is to build those, because they are going to be fun. I'm also going to be soon covering the event controller and some of the cool things we can do with that. So there's all that, and plenty more to come. And me and my little drone friends, assuming it lands, come on, land for me. Finish on a high note. We'll see you then.